The Harvard president has resigned, Claudine Gay, and this is under a lot of pressure that really began with the university's lackluster response to pro-Palestine, in some instances anti-Semitism on campus. And then while she was under that cloud of scrutiny for that, you had people who were digging up information on her, as happens when someone is in the public eye. And there's been 40-odd accusations of plagiarism. Students can get expelled from Harvard for plagiarism, yet you have the president of Harvard with 40 documented allegations of plagiarism. So she resigned under pressure. Here's the headline from the New York Times. Harvard president resigns after mounting plagiarism accusations. And of course, she essentially blames it on racism. She says, amidst all of this, it has been distressing to have doubt cast on my commitments to confronting hate and to upholding scholarly rigor, two bedrock values that are fundamental to who I am. And I'm frightened to be subjected to personal attacks and threats fueled by racial animus. Now, do I think that some crazy wackos on the internet probably did hurl personal attacks and threats fueled by racial animus? Yes. Do I think that those were the predominant criticisms of her tenure at Harvard? No, but this is a tactic. Remember, we talk about this a lot. When you're under criticism, rightfully so, we see this on the left a lot, that they will point to the most extreme criticism they're receiving that is not the norm, and they'll use it to try to get sympathy so people back off. And that's what she's doing here. New York Times says Dr. Gay's resignation came after the latest plagiarism accusations against her were circulated in an unsigned complaint published on Monday in the Washington Free Beacon, a conservative online journal that has led a campaign against Dr. Gay over the past few weeks. The complaint added to about 40 other plagiarism accusations that had already been circulated in the journal. The accusations raised questions about whether Harvard was holding its president to the same academic standards as its students. And that really is the issue for me. You know, and the plagiarism is, I hate to say it like this, the plagiarism in this context is worse than missteps on the pro-Palestine stuff. Because as a university, you can make arguments about free speech, even abhorrent free speech, although I do not believe they were morally consistent on that issue. But we can have a reasonable conversation and debate about what should be allowed, what shouldn't be allowed, what you should say in response, what you shouldn't say. Although obviously she was a failure when she appeared before Congress. But the plagiarism is cutting and dry. You would dismiss a student for doing that. And you've been accused of it. And the examples of it are very clear, by the way. I mean, you have full paragraphs ripped off, and she says, oh, it was a citation problem. That's not a citation problem. You didn't have quotes around it. Like, I'm sorry. So anyway, that's all crazy. And it doesn't surprise me that she would try to make herself the victim in all of this. The media coverage, I already have a low bar, low expectations, especially on issues where race is involved. Low bar for what the media coverage is going to look like. This takes that to a whole new level. I mean, it's lower than I've ever seen. Instead of this being about Claudine Gay's actions, about her plagiarism, about her support of anti-Semitism in the form of silence, this is about conservatives. This is about conservatives attacking her because of her race, because they don't like Harvard as an institution. And the lengths that, so I'm going to read just two examples of this, one from Politico, one from the Associated Press. So the Politico headline, how the right toppled Harvard's president. So it's putting like the responsibility on the right as opposed to the person who did wrong. It says, coordinated attack. Conservatives who have long been at war with elite academic institutions have pointed to these universities' responses to the conflict between Israel and Hamas as the latest example of the ivory tower's skewed values, as they should. That's a legitimate criticism that does speak to a larger problem. Politico goes on to say, today the right got a strong dose of satisfaction by engineering the departure of the head of the most influential university in the world, engineering the departure by highlighting things she did? That's the right engineering the departure of the head of the most influential university in the world? Now look, conservatives did not relent on this. Christopher Rufo was one of them. I'll get to him in a moment. They did not relent. But it wasn't as if they were making things up about her. They were trying to keep it in the news cycle until mainstream outlets started covering it, as they should have from the beginning. It's bizarre to all of a sudden plagiarism's fine. totally acceptable. All of a sudden, anti-Semitism's fine, totally acceptable. And because it's conservatives who are raising issue, it's what, manufactured? And for them to say the right got a strong dose of satisfaction. I'm sure that they feel satisfied with the result. But in framing it that way, you're suggesting that they shouldn't be satisfied, that they've done something wrong in bringing attention to what she's done. It just shows the media's hatred for anyone who's conservative. Now, bear with me, because the Associated Press article is even worse. And the scary thing about the Associated Press is they feed a lot of the other outlets in the country because they're a wire service. So you'll see Associated Press articles republished in a lot of different print publications, television websites, etc. So when the Associated Press does something absolutely unhinged like this, it's going to end up in a lot of other places. And there are going to be a lot of eyeballs on this sort of content. So the tweet from the Associated Press: Harvard President's resignation highlights new conservative weapon against colleges: plagiarism. What do you mean? First of all, plagiarism isn't a conservative weapon against colleges. Colleges have policies against plagiarism. That's your own weapon that you've used, rightfully so, to kick kids out of college. So how can your own rule for conduct be a conservative weapon? The article goes on to say Christopher Rufo, who was a former Seattle City Council candidate, a conservative activist who helped orchestrate the effort, celebrated her departure as a win in his campaign against elite institutions of higher education. On X, formerly Twitter, he wrote in all caps, "scalped," as if Gay was a trophy of violence, invoking a gruesome practice taken up by white colonists who sought to eradicate Native Americans. First of all, they do realize that Native Americans did a lot of scalping. So there's kind of a history lesson that this Associated Press writer needs to learn. As if Gay was a trophy of violence. So now it's words of violence, silence is violence, pointing out that someone plagiarized his violence. This is, how do I put it? This isn't just casual bias. You see a lot of casual bias in the media where the writer or the person maybe doesn't realize their own bias or how they're writing something is steeped in bias. This is intentional and malicious bias. When you look at Christopher Rufo, a conservative activist, let's say that someone had pointed out an example of a conservative who'd engaged in plagiarism. Do you think they'd ever be described as a liberal activist? As a progressive activist? No, there's a connotation there that the Associated Press wants to get across. Christopher Rufo, a conservative activist who helped orchestrate the effort. And orchestrate to me has this connotation of something done with evil intent. We've orchestrated this whole plot to get her out of office. No, they highlighted things she actually did. And then she had to face the music for things she actually did. Conservatives pointed it out, but they didn't make her do those things. They didn't hide the fact that she had done those things like she did for many, many years. They just wanted her to be held accountable. And this is exhibit A and B, why people don't trust the media anymore.